Hello, we are the last surviving grandchildren of Herman and Caroline Schilter.
I am Alpha Stammer.
Look at me, Altha. Hi there.
Look at Linda.
Yeah, look at Linda.
Oh, I'm taking your picture.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Yes, this is Altha, and she lives in Faulkton, South Dakota. And I'm Allan Edward Schilter, and I live in Ozark, Missouri.
What do you know about Grandpa Herman?
Well, Grandpa Herman was born in 1844 in a town called Pomerania, or a country called Pomerania, which is part of Prussia, which is now Germany and Poland. And he is the son of Wilhelm Schilter and Louis Zebke. In 1871, he immigrated to the United States on the boat Ohio, and he landed in Baltimore, Maryland. And from Baltimore, he went to Wisconsin, Berlin, Wisconsin area.
Okay, what do you know about Grandma Caroline?
Well, Grandma Caroline was born in 1852 to Frederick and Leva Lenz Schrant, and they lived in Sitlow, Germany, which is about 40 German miles east of the town of what we know Berlin. And Frederick was a tailor, and then in the spring of 1871 they sailed to America from Bremen, Germany, and landed in Castle Gardens, New York. There were 372 people on the ship, and there were a lot of disease and a lot of people died, but none in the family of the Schrants, and they all survived. And then after arriving in New York, they went to Chicago for a brief period of time and witnessed the Great Chicago Fire, where 100,000 people were left without a home. After that, they went to Berlin, Wisconsin.
Okay, where were your grandparents married?
They were married on November 8th, 1874 at Grace Lutheran Church in Ripon, Wisconsin. And the witnesses for that wedding was John Schrant and August Lenz.
Did they have any children?
Yes, they had 5 children, all of whom were born in Wisconsin. John Wilhelm Schilter, Frederick Schilter, Amelia Trask, Herman Ludwig Schilter, and my father Edward Reinhold Schilter, who was born in December 14th, 1887.
What do you know about the children?
Well, there's no record of the death of John, but I think he probably died as an infant. I have not been able to locate any burial records in the Wisconsin area. He definitely did not move to South Dakota with the family. Fred moved to South Dakota, and he also farmed in Regina, Canada for a brief period of time. He never married, and in South Dakota he was a carpenter and helped build the house that I grew up in, as well as the chicken house that is on our property. And I can remember visiting his home down around the gravel pit and south of us, and I can also remember sitting on his lap in our home. And Amelia moved to South Dakota, and she married Albert Trask, and her daughter is Fern Hayline. And then my father Edward moved to South Dakota. He was the youngest of the children, and he married my mother, who was Cora Denver Hayline. And Edward died in Liberty, Missouri in 1889, and is buried in Athol. Altha, tell us a little bit about your father Herman.
Well, my father was a real good father. He never got mad at us kids. And one time he was separating milk and saving the cream, and I happened to spill the cream. And I thought, boy, I was really going to get it. But he never said a word. He just said I had to clean it up, and I mean, I thought sure he'd get mad at me. And then we'd go fishing after the chores were done and after we had supper, and we'd go down a half a mile south and fish for bullheads. We'd usually get enough to have for breakfast the next morning, and I think we walked down there. I wasn't too big, you know, and but he was a good father, a real good father, and I don't know. There was a lot of incidents that, you know, that maybe we should have got a scolding for, but he was pretty good, you know. I mean, he looked at us, and I guess we thought that was enough, you know. He wouldn't spank us or anything.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I did. I had 3 brothers, Melvin and Glenn and Clarence, and then I had 1 sister, and it seemed like we were always together. She was about a year and a half older than I, and we were always together. I have pictures of us, and we had to wear our hats to church. We always had hats on, and I have several pictures of silly looking hats now. But they're all gone. I'm the last one, and I miss Melvin an awful lot because we used to converse, you know, over our old times, and now I have nobody to ask except him. He does pretty
Well,
good.
Melvin used to come over on Sundays a lot too,
But,
and visit Mom. He'd always come over on Sunday.
but Jack does pretty good about remembering things.
Well, I was an only child, but I remember a lot of things about my father. He was a great prankster in his young days, and Halloween was a special time for him. He and a bunch of the neighbor kids, which would have included Herman. One time they took a wagon apart, disassembled it, and moved it to the top of somebody's barn, reassembled it, and put it on. Back in the wagon was sitting on top of the barn, 2 wheels on one side of the roof and 2 on the other. Well, and another time, they took some harnesses from the horses and put them on the cows. Well, the farmer let the cows out to the pasture and went to harness his horses and couldn't find any harness. And he was just stewing all over, thought somebody had stolen him. And that farmer was just shocked to death when the cows came home that night wearing the horses' harnesses. And to hear Dad tell that, he would just start laughing and rolling around. And he couldn't hardly finish the story. And one story I remember him telling about Herman, they were doing some pranks, and the farmer and the farm where they were started chasing him. And that farmer had some sort of a chicken house that it's kind of like an earth berm, and Herman takes off running, and he doesn't realize that he's running off the top of that chicken house until he goes off the edge and falls down to the ground and picks himself up and keeps going. And but they were quite the pranksters for Halloween. But probably the thing that I am the most grateful for my parents is the Christian background. So that's good.
You might tell them about Grandpa and the snow and the teacher. I thought that was the funniest thing
yeah.
I ever heard.
Yeah, they went to, all the children went to a country school. They primarily had school in the wintertime because the kids needed to be home working during the spring, summer, and fall. And anyway, Dad was supposed to get there early and build the fire. So he got there early and there was a lot of snow outside, so as a prank, he went and moved some snow upstairs right over the teacher's desk. And of course it was cold and frozen in there, and started the fire. And as the day progressed, the fire got hotter and hotter, and the snow started melting and dripping down. And started dripping down and on the teacher's desk and on the teacher, and they didn't know where, the teacher didn't know where the water was coming from, but all the kids did, of course. And I think the teacher sent Dad home early that day.
How far away were your school? Did you have to go to grade school?
Dad went about a half mile away, or straight east of the farmhouse, was where the school was.
Tell us anything about going to grade school?
Oh, we had to walk to grade school, and walk home, and I remember once, and we had a lumber wagon, and Glenn was going to school there, and we had a runaway horse, and I remember Glenn saying, hang on, and that horse run all the way home then, you know. And us kids, we were so scared because he was going so fast, but we got home okay. And then another thing, we always went to church. We went to Chelsea Church, and my dad and all of us kids, we all pile in all that Nash car, and we'd go to church every Sunday.
And they had a high school in Athol, didn't they?
Yes, and I went to Altha High School. And lots of times Dad would take us in with the lumber wagon, you know, it was so cold, and he'd take us in like on Sunday night, and then we'd stay. We had a boarding place there that we'd stay over the week and then go home on weekends. Yeah.
Well, I walked to grade school too, and just yesterday we were driving down the road, and we got about a half mile, and Linda says, this is the longest mile I've ever seen, but and I learned to drive on that road in the old car, and I always had trouble driving straight. In fact, I never could steer anything. The bicycle, they started me out downhill and in her yard and told me to ride down through the gate and down the road, and I never had any trouble with my balance. I kept perfect balance on the bicycle, but I couldn't steer. I missed the gate by 10 feet and went through the barbed wire fence. Can you imagine that?
He drives better now, I hope.
Yeah, I do hope.
Well, didn't Marlene used to, you kids would walk then the rest of the way, or?
Yes, she lived about halfway between where I lived and the school, and I would either cut through the pasture or ride my bike,
Yeah.
and I would meet her at the end of her driveway, and then we'd walk together. And, Marlene and I have always been very close. I think there's about a year and a half difference in our ages. She's younger than I am, but and we'd play together. And she had a brother, Butch, who lives in Rock Springs, Wyoming now, but he was quite a bit younger than she was, and anyway, I do remember in 55, Glenn left the farm and moved to Idaho, and he worked at the Kellogg mines, and I remember the picture of Butch when they came over to say goodbye. I had just joined the National Guards in March of 1957, and I had all my Army uniforms and everything, and had a nice jacket, and we put that on Butch, and he posed for us, and of course he was small, the jacket came all the way down to the ground on him, but to me it only came onto my waist, but and then we had a lot of fun. Mom used to babysit Butch, and he didn't like to go to sleep very well, and she would rock him to sleep, and Marlene and I would be playing hide the thimble. We'd take turns hiding the thimble, trying to find it, and we'd get making so much noise that Mom was singing a lullaby to Butch, and she just would make up words like, "You two, be quiet in there. I'm trying to put Butch to sleep." She'd do it in a sing-song fashion, and of course he was too small to know the difference whether it was a lullaby or instructions to his sister and cousin to
And
be
Butch
quiet.
Butch is the only one with the Schilter name now.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but he's got a boy that
Yeah.
takes the Schilter name
Yes, a boy, I believe by the name of Dustin.
Yeah.
It is my goal to meet him sometime, since he is the youngest person with the Schilter
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
And they live in Wyoming, Rock Springs, Wyoming now. And, well, your sister Artis had,
Yeah, she lived in Aberdeen and she had 5 children, and one died. And she is dead now too, but she married that Lester Schoen, and they lived in Aberdeen all the time. So I don't know. We don't have much to go to Aberdeen for now. Her children don't go up there either too much because nobody's there. Ours is gone and Les is gone. And
well, Jane and I used to, I would bring her home to your folks. Of course, I think at that time your dad had passed away and Dora was still living, and I was going to school up Northern, and I would bring Joan home, and she and I got to be pretty close because we were about the same age.
yeah, she was. Yeah, she must have been about the same age as you.
Right, but I think she died in 1966.
That's
And then there's Jane, another daughter,
Yeah.
who lives in Omaha, Nebraska, I believe. And then Denise used to be a farmer's or co-op or what? Extension agent here in the area. And but I think she's down around Sioux City,
Yes.
Iowa now.
And then Roger.
Roger lives in Minneapolis. I talked to him just a couple of days ago.
Oh yeah.
He and his son are coming out here in 2 weeks and go pheasant hunting.
Oh.
And Roger is in our development of new Dairy Queens, and his territory is the western United States, and so he travels quite a bit. And then the other son is Doug, and he lives in St. Louis, Missouri area, St. Charles, Missouri, and he's a pilot for American Airlines, and he has probably carried on the Schilter tradition in that he, like my father, didn't get married until he was in his early 50s, and he is married, and he and his wife Kate live in the St. Charles area. Altha, tell us something about your children. We have one here, Jack, and his wife Rita, but...
Yeah, Roland passed away in 6.
07.
What?
07.
7. Oh,
2007.
yeah. And he had 2 boys, and they're taking over the home place now, where we raised the kids.
When did you and Dad get married?
When did I what?
When did you and Dad get married? Tell about that.
Oh, we got married in what, 1940?
In Redfield?
Yes, in Redfield, in the minister's house. And the house is still standing there where we got married, and John Wilhelm stood up for us, and then Artis stood up for us. And we went down to the park and had our pictures taken, and Aunt Jean bought us our dinner, and so that was about and then we stayed, then we went to, stayed in that house, our house there, where we raised the kids, and I remember Grandpa Wilhelm, he always had to go with people when they were going someplace. And so he was over there bright and early the next morning. We were fixing some breakfast, and he wanted to go to Minneapolis with us. We were going there for our honeymoon. And and Clayton says, well, this is one place you're not going to go. Well, I won't be any bother. I won't be any bother. But he didn't go with us either. But we went in our little old Ford. It didn't have speedometer or nothing, but we took off, and then Roland was born, and then June. And June, of course, she traveled a lot, and she ended up out in California. And I don't know. I said, why you had to go clear out there for? And then we had Roland and Jack and June.
Okay.
That was the three kids, and Jack is staying here taking care of me. He does pretty good.
Good. Well, we're going to talk with Jack and Rita in just a little bit, but another thing I remember about my father is that, for one thing, he was swinging in the barn on a swing and knocked the motorcycle bar down, and it hit him in the eye, and he had a scar in his eye that always caused him a little bit of problem with his sight. And then another thing, he went to Minneapolis as Dad was always adventuresome and willing to try new things, and so he went to Minneapolis and bought a car, a Ford, I suppose it was a Model T, and he watched it being made. When it got off the assembly line, he got in the car and drove it home from Minneapolis. So saved on the transport fee, I guess.
Tell him about the washing machine.
Oh yes, Dad was always liking to invent things and make things easier rather than doing it the hard way. He always wanted to do it an easier way. So his job was to turn the washing machine, to stir the agitator, and this is before electricity and motors and stuff like that. So he hooked up a device that was propelled by wind. Had a windmill wheel setting outside and a series of gears and shafts that came in and turned the washing machine. Well, that worked really good until a gust of wind came up, and he had it fastened together so well that it tipped over the washing machine, and his mother wasn't too happy with that. Well, this concludes our talk with you. We hope that you've enjoyed it and know a little bit about the history. I am just so astounded to think that this is 2012, October the 3rd, and that we are still living, and our grandparents we can trace back to 1844. In fact, when I read in the encyclopedia about Prussia, I found or they displayed a photo that says this would be a typical photo that you might find in Prussia. I took one look at it. It was a warehouse on the Baltic or the North Sea, Baltic Sea, in the town called Gdańsk. And it was a big red warehouse with a overhanging roof that had a winch that would pick the cargo up out of the boats and bring it into the warehouse. And I took one look at that, and I called my wife Linda over, and I says, Linda, look at this picture. We have the same exact picture that we took ourselves when we were there, but at the time that we were there, we did not have a clue that I had any family history going back to that area. We don't know that my grandfather, lived in that area, but it was a typical picture, and so it's a great event for us. So thank you for your time, and we hope you've enjoyed this video. Bye.
Well, yeah, it is.